There comes a moment, often quiet, often unsettling, when you pause and ask, whose life am I really living? At first glance, your days may seem ordinary. You wake up, follow routines, chase goals, meet expectations. Yet beneath it all, there's a subtle tension, a whispering doubt, a persistent sense that something isn't aligned. Comment 1. If you have ever felt an inner misalignment beneath a life that looked fine. When did you first notice the whisper that something was off? Comment 2. If you have experienced a recent moment that made you question whose life you're living. You realize you've been making choices not entirely your own. That your beliefs, desires, and even your identity may have been shaped by forces you never truly questioned. Parents' hopes, cultural norms, early praise and punishment, or the silent fear of disapproval. Slowly, unconsciously, you've adapted. You've learned how to be acceptable. You've played the part well, but in doing so, you may have drifted from your essence. Psychology calls this the construction of the persona, the social mask we wear to function in the world. It helps us survive, succeed, even connect. But when we become too identified with it, we forget what lies beneath. We forget that the mask is not the face. At some point, adaptation turns into estrangement. You find yourself performing rather than living, reacting rather than choosing. Life starts to feel scripted, written by hands that are not your own. That is the turning point. The quiet ache becomes a call, not to rebel blindly, but to begin remembering, to turn inward, to question not just what you're doing, but who is doing it. The real beginning of life is not found in achievements or approval. It begins the moment you stop outsourcing your identity and start reclaiming it from within. This article invites you on that journey, a psychological and emotional unfolding through the lens of Carl Jung's depth psychology. Together, we'll uncover the hidden forces shaping your sense of self, confront the shadows that keep you fragmented, and move toward the profound realization. Your truest life is not something to invent. It is something waiting to be found. Imagine standing in front of a mirror. You see a face you've grown used to, your name, your role, your reputation. But what if much of what you identify as you is actually a reflection of what others needed you to be? This is the dilemma of the persona, a key concept in Carl Jung's psychology. The persona is not your true self. It's the social mask you construct to survive and succeed in the external world. It begins as a tool. You learn to smile when praised, hide tears when shamed, speak when spoken to, and stay silent when expression feels risky. Over time, the mask becomes comfortable, too comfortable. The danger arises when the persona is mistaken for identity. You begin to believe the role is the person, the good child, the strong leader, the selfless caretaker, the high achiever. But behind the mask, your authentic self, your fears, desires, quirks, and contradictions remains unexplored, even suppressed. Jung warned that over-identifying with the persona creates a profound inner split. You feel disconnected, even when everything looks fine. You may find yourself saying yes when you mean no, pleasing others while feeling empty, or succeeding externally while quietly unraveling inside. This is not a moral failure. It's a psychological strategy, a learned survival pattern. But like all strategies, it has limits. Eventually, the weight of maintaining a false self leads to fatigue, anxiety, or a vague sense that you're not truly alive. Think of the persona like clothing, useful, even necessary in society, but never meant to replace your skin. When you forget it's a layer, you lose access to what lies beneath. The first step in finding yourself is recognizing the mask you've been wearing. Not to tear it off in rebellion, but to gently ask, is this who I am, or who I thought I had to be? This question, subtle yet seismic, marks the beginning of your return. It cracks the surface, it invites the unknown, and it prepares you for what comes next, facing the parts of you the mask was designed to hide. After the persona comes the shadow, the hidden half of your psychological life. If the persona is the mask you show the world, the shadow is everything you hide from it. These are not always dark or evil traits. Often, they are simply parts of you that were discouraged, rejected, or misunderstood early in life. A boy told not to cry may suppress his sensitivity. A girl praised only when quiet may bury her assertiveness. Slowly, piece by piece, you exile parts of yourself, not because they're wrong, but because they threaten acceptance. Carl Jung defined the shadow as the unknown, dark side of the personality. But he also emphasized that the shadow isn't purely negative. It holds suppressed emotions, yes, but also unacknowledged potential, creativity, passion, and strength. What's denied doesn't disappear. It goes underground, and it doesn't stay silent. The shadow shows itself in projections. You dislike someone without knowing why. You react strongly to others' flaws, unaware they reflect something within you. You self-sabotage right before success. These moments are not random. They are your unconscious speaking. Jung believed that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. That intense jealousy, that quick temper, that recurring anxiety, they are signals. The more we ignore them, the more control they exert. You might think you're running your life with logic and will, but until you face your shadow, much of your behavior is being directed by what you refuse to see. Facing the shadow isn't comfortable. It requires honesty without judgment. It means sitting with shame, envy, resentment, not to indulge them, but to understand their origin. Often these emotions trace back to childhood wounds, moments when you felt unworthy, invisible, or unsafe being your full self. But here's the paradox. The shadow, when integrated, becomes a source of profound power. It restores vitality, deepens relationships, and brings clarity to choices. To know your darkness is to reclaim your wholeness. Imagine a life where you no longer fear parts of yourself, where you're not wasting energy hiding, projecting, or performing, where your decisions come from clarity, not compensation. That freedom begins when you stop running and turn around. In the next stage of the journey, we'll explore how these hidden forces shape your daily life in subtle, repeating patterns, and how noticing them is the key to transformation. Have you ever found yourself in the same emotional loop again and again, despite your best intentions? You change jobs, but the feeling of being unappreciated follows you. You enter a new relationship, but the same conflict resurfaces. You promise to handle stress differently, but old reactions take over. It's as if life is stuck on repeat. This isn't coincidence. It's the unconscious trying to get your attention. According to Jungian psychology, the psyche seeks wholeness, and one of its primary strategies is repetition. When an inner wound remains unacknowledged, rejection, abandonment, betrayal, it doesn't just sit quietly. It recycles itself through people, situations, and emotions, hoping that this time you'll notice. This is the voice of the shadow speaking in disguise. These recurring patterns are not punishments. They are invitations. For example, someone deeply afraid of being rejected may become overly agreeable, sacrificing their needs to gain approval. But over time, resentment builds, relationships feel hollow, and burnout sets in. Until the root wound, the fear of not being enough, is faced, the cycle continues. Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." In other words, we mistake patterns for personality. We think, "I'm just unlucky," or "that's just how I am." But more often, it's unprocessed history playing itself out in the present. Recognizing these loops is the first act of liberation. Start by paying attention to disproportionate emotional reactions. When something small triggers something big, anger, fear, defensiveness, that's a clue. Ask, what does this remind me of? What part of me is feeling unheard, unseen, or unsafe? Patterns are the footprints of the shadow, and behind each footprint is a younger version of you, still waiting for permission to feel, express, and heal. Waking up means stepping out of automatic living. It means becoming curious rather than reactive, observing rather than judging. It's not about blame, it's about inquiry. When you begin to see the script you've been following, you also begin to edit it, and eventually, to write something new. Comment 1. If you have ever consciously edited your script, changed a habit, boundary, or role to feel more authentic. What's one pattern you're choosing to rewrite right now? Comment 2 if you have experienced noticing your loops, but haven't made a change yet. In the next insight, we'll explore how your sense of self is often built on illusions, and why real transformation requires questioning even the most basic assumptions about who you are. We speak of finding ourselves, as if the self were a singular, stable thing, like a final puzzle piece we simply haven't placed yet. But what if the self you've been trying to find doesn't truly exist? Or rather, what if the version of you you're most familiar with is merely a fragment, constructed, maintained, and defended by habit, culture, and fear? This is where Jung's distinction between the ego and the self becomes essential. The ego is your conscious identity, your name, story, memories, preferences. It's the narrator of your experience. It provides stability, continuity, and orientation. But it's also selective and defensive. It filters reality to protect itself. It resists change, avoids discomfort, and clings to certainty, even when that certainty causes suffering. Many people spend their lives over-identified with this ego structure, believing that who I am is equivalent to what I know about myself. But Jung argued that the ego is only a small island in a vast ocean, the ocean being the self, the totality of who you are, conscious and unconscious, known and unknown, light and shadow. The fixed self is an illusion. You are not a static entity. You are a process, a becoming. Jung wrote, "The self is a circle whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere." In other words, the self is expansive, fluid, dynamic. It includes the contradictions, the paradoxes, the transformations. And it cannot be fully contained by a single story, title, or image. This illusion of fixity is comforting. It gives you a sense of control, but it also cages you. It keeps you stuck in roles, repeating thoughts, and inherited narratives. To move beyond it, you must loosen your grip on certainty. You must be willing to say, I am more than I thought. I am changing. I am discovering. Real self-discovery is not about defining yourself more precisely. It's about allowing yourself to unfold. As we move forward, we'll begin to explore how the unconscious communicates with us, not through logic, but through symbols, dreams, and emotional signals. The deeper self is always speaking. The question is, are you listening? If your conscious mind is the narrator of your life, the unconscious is the author you rarely meet, yet whose influence shapes every page. According to Jung, the unconscious is not a chaotic void. It's an intelligent, symbolic realm. It contains your forgotten memories, suppressed emotions, lost potentials, and untapped creativity. It also holds the key to healing and integration. But the unconscious doesn't speak in rational sentences. It speaks in patterns, metaphors, emotions, and, most powerfully, dreams. You've had them. A strange dream that lingers for days. A recurring image or place. A sudden emotional reaction that feels out of proportion. These are not random glitches. They are messages, psychological postcards from within. In Jungian psychology, dreams are seen as direct expressions of the unconscious. They reveal what the conscious ego cannot yet see or accept. Symbols emerge to represent inner dynamics. A locked door, a collapsing house, a wild animal, a shadowy figure. Each image holds meaning, not universal, but deeply personal. To work with a dream is to decode the language of your own psyche. And it's not just dreams. The unconscious speaks through bodily sensations, intuition, synchronicities, those meaningful coincidences that seem to defy logic. It speaks through your art, your slips of the tongue, your sudden moods. The question is not whether your unconscious is speaking. It is whether you're willing to listen. In a world obsessed with productivity and control, introspection becomes a radical act. Most people numb the signals with distraction, entertainment, or endless doing. But the inner voice doesn't go away. When ignored, it turns up the volume through anxiety, burnout, chronic dissatisfaction. Jung believed that healing comes not from silencing these messages, but from dialogue. To ask, what am I not seeing? What is trying to emerge? What part of me is asking to be heard? This shift, from avoidance to attention, marks a turning point in the individuation process. You stop treating symptoms as problems and start seeing them as guides. Your unconscious is not your enemy. It is your compass. In the next insight, we'll explore how the ancient forces of archetypes live inside you and how recognizing them can radically shift your understanding of self and destiny. Beneath your personal history lies a deeper story, one not written by your family, your culture, or even your ego. It is the mythic layer of your psyche, the realm of archetypes. Carl Jung introduced the concept of archetypes as universal psychological blueprints, primordial patterns of behavior, perception, and emotion that live in the collective unconscious. These are not inherited memories, but inherited possibilities. They are ways of being, encoded in the human experience itself. You've met them before, in stories, dreams, and within yourself. The hero who faces fear to grow. The shadow who threatens but reveals truth. The wise old man who offers guidance. The innocent who yearns for safety. The rebel who disrupts the status quo. These are not just characters in mythology or film. They are forces within you, waiting to be recognized, understood, and integrated. Take the hero, for example. This archetype often awakens when you feel called to change, whether through crisis, loss, or longing. But the hero never travels alone. The shadow always appears on the path, mirroring your fears, your resistance, and the parts of you still unconscious. Jung believed that recognizing archetypes helps us make sense of inner conflict. You may want transformation, hero, but avoid discomfort, shadow. You may crave connection, lover, but fear vulnerability, wounded child. These inner forces aren't contradictions. They're conversations. By naming these energies, you create distance from their grip. You realize, this isn't who I am. It's an archetypal pattern I'm experiencing. And that insight gives you choice. The goal is not to eliminate these archetypes, but to work with them, to learn from them, to see when the saboteur is whispering doubt, or when the warrior is needed to set boundaries. This inner recognition brings depth and meaning to life. You are no longer just reacting. You are participating in a myth unfolding through your existence. Think of your psyche as a theater. Archetypes are the actors, the roles, the scripts. But you are the director once you become aware. In the next insight, we'll explore two foundational archetypes that live in every psyche, the Anima and the Animus, and how balancing them is key to personal wholeness. What if part of your inner conflict stems not from the outer world, but from an imbalance between the masculine and feminine energies within you? In Jungian psychology, these forces are called the Anima and Animus. They are not tied to biological sex or gender identity. Rather, they are archetypal energies that exist in all people, and their integration is essential for individuation. The Anima represents the inner feminine, emotion, intuition, receptivity, creativity, and connection to the unconscious. In men, she often appears first in dreams or projections, onto women who seem mysterious, nurturing, or unpredictable. But she lives within, as the gateway to feeling, vulnerability, and soulfulness. The Animus, by contrast, embodies the inner masculine, logic, structure, assertiveness, clarity, and rational thought. In women, he may be projected onto men who appear powerful, decisive, or emotionally distant. But again, his true place is within, offering inner strength, boundaries, and purpose. When either side is rejected or undeveloped, imbalance arises. A person disconnected from the anima may struggle to access emotion, suppress vulnerability, or view intuition as weakness. Life becomes overly rigid, transactional, or emotionally numb. Comment 1 if you have ever leaned into feeling, intuition, and receptivity, anima, when life felt too rigid. Which inner energy do you need more of right now? Softness or structure? Comment 2 if you have experienced a season of strengthening clarity, boundaries, and decisive action, animus. On the other hand, rejecting the animus may lead to indecision, lack of direction, or difficulty asserting needs and setting boundaries. Wholeness arises not from choosing one over the other, but from integration. To embrace the anima is to reclaim feeling, softness, and imagination. To embody the animus is to cultivate structure, focus, and action. When these polarities dance in harmony, a new internal dialogue begins, one where head and heart collaborate, not compete. Jung emphasized that encounters with these archetypes often begin through projection. We are drawn to, or repelled by, people who carry the qualities we have not yet accepted in ourselves. Romantic relationships especially often serve as mirrors for this inner dynamic. But real growth begins when you reclaim those projections. When you say, "That strength I admire, I can develop it. That tenderness I fear, I can learn to hold it." You become less dependent on others to complete you, because you are already moving toward inner wholeness. As we near the end of this journey, we'll now turn to perhaps the most radical insight in Jung's work. The self is not what you think it is. And your truest life begins not by perfecting the ego, but by transcending it. You spend much of your life building an identity, collecting roles, opinions, preferences, and accomplishments. You call this identity me. You work to protect it, improve it, and present it to the world. But at some point, you begin to sense its limits. No matter how much you succeed, some part of you remains unsatisfied. No matter how carefully you define yourself, there are moments when it all feels hollow. That's because the ego, your conscious identity, is not the final destination. It's only the beginning. In Jungian psychology, the ego is a necessary structure. It helps you navigate the world, make decisions, and distinguish yourself from others. But it is not the whole story. It is the gatekeeper, not the soul. Beyond the ego lies the self, a deeper, vaster center of your being. Jung described the self as the totality of the psyche, not just the conscious parts, but also the unconscious, the shadow, the anima, animus, and the archetypes. The self is wholeness, and it has always been within you. But the ego fears dissolution. It clings to its labels and boundaries. It tells you, "I am this. I am not that." It creates separation between good and bad, self and other, known and unknown. Yet true growth requires the courage to step beyond those walls. You don't create the self. You remember it. Like sunlight behind clouds, it's always been there, obscured, but never gone. This remembering requires surrender. Not giving up, but letting go. Letting go of the need to define yourself through external validation. Letting go of inherited scripts. Letting go of the illusion that you are separate from the deeper intelligence moving through your life. Jung often described individuation, the journey of becoming whole, as not a linear path, but a spiral. You don't walk away from who you were. You circle deeper into who you've always been. And when you do, something remarkable happens. Fear fades. Compulsion softens. Meaning emerges. Not because you've fixed yourself, but because you've stopped trying to be someone you're not. In the final section, we'll bring it all together with the emotional and spiritual climax of this inner odyssey, the moment where life truly begins. Something shifts when you stop asking, "Who should I be?" and begin asking, "Who have I always been?" beneath the noise. Up until now, much of your life may have been shaped by adaptation, by pleasing, performing, avoiding, surviving. You wore the persona to belong. You buried the shadow to feel safe. You mistook roles for reality. You repeated old wounds, searching for closure. You clung to the ego, hoping to be enough. But underneath all of it, a deeper presence remained untouched. The journey of individuation isn't about becoming better. It's about becoming whole. It's about reclaiming the lost parts of yourself, your emotions, your instincts, your inner opposites, and weaving them into a living truth. Not the truth society gives you. Your truth. In Jung's view, this integration is the birth of true life. It is the moment when you stop running from discomfort and turn to face it, with curiosity instead of fear. When you listen to your dreams, question your reactions, follow your inner symbols. When you stop outsourcing your worth and begin trusting your own resonance. And it's not a final arrival, it's a new orientation. You begin to live from the inside out. You respond instead of react. You feel instead of perform. You create instead of conform. That's when life begins. Not when everything is figured out, but when you are finally willing to meet yourself fully. In that sacred moment, you realize you were never lost. You were only waiting to be found. You've spent years trying to become someone. Now perhaps it's time to return to who you truly are. Finding yourself is not a luxury, it's a necessity. Because until you do, every decision is colored by distortion. Every relationship becomes a mirror for what you haven't yet healed. Every goal risks becoming another mask, another escape. But when you begin the process of individuation, of making the unconscious conscious, of integrating shadow, anima, animus, archetypes, and ego, you begin to live differently. You begin to choose from wholeness, not from fear. You speak with clarity, not performance. You rest in your own presence, no longer needing permission to be. Jung's work reminds us that the real journey is inward, that your true self is not something you build from scratch, but something ancient and eternal already within you, waiting for remembrance. This isn't easy work. It requires courage. It asks you to sit with discomfort, to revisit the wounds you've been avoiding, to let go of the false safety of a fixed identity. But the reward is freedom. Freedom from compulsive approval seeking. Freedom from cycles that no longer serve you. Freedom from the quiet unrest of living someone else's story. And it begins with a single question, asked with honesty and without expectation. What part of myself have I forgotten? Start there. Begin journaling your dreams. Notice your emotional patterns. Pay attention to synchronicities. Question the scripts you've inherited. Create space for stillness, for listening, for remembering. Because life doesn't begin when you graduate, get the job, find the partner, or fix yourself. Life begins when you find yourself. And if you've read this far, perhaps you've already begun. Comment 1. If you have ever committed to one concrete step this week, journaling a dream, noting a trigger, or sitting in stillness. What small action will you take in the next 24 hours to honor your individuation? Comment 2. If you have experienced momentum after sharing your intention and want accountability.